them and their body and use recess appointments instead. So the question is, why does Trump want to use recess appointments? And what kind of cabinet is he assembling that he doesn't think he can get his picks through the Republican-controlled Senate? It's a question that looms over all of Washington today. As names are floated and his administration starts to take shape, Trump announced this morning that Tom Homan, his former acting director of ICE, will be a border czar. Washington Post reports this: a border czar role does not require Senate confirmation. Homan stepped down from the administration in frustration when the White House failed to move his nomination to be ICE director towards Senate confirmation. He became a Fox News analyst on immigration and border issues instead. J.D. Vance today confirmed a CNN report that another immigration hardliner, Stephen Miller, will be returning to the White House as Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. Trump's demand in the wake of his massive victory for unchecked power as he fills out his administration, and why he's doing it this way is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Out west, where Trump is, in West Palm Beach, NBC News correspondent Von Hilliard joins us. Also joining us, MSNBC columnist and contributor Charlie Sykes is here, and former Democratic Senator, MSNBC political analyst Claire McCaskill is here. Claire, first, just add anything I may have left out about why presidents use recess appointments. I mean, the history I offered was one that I was around for. George W. Bush was in probably the weakest standing of his presidency, and John Bolton was not a popular pick even in his own party, so it was a way to get someone there for a shorter period of time. Why would Trump, after such a commanding victory, use a tool most closely associated with weakness in the president making these picks?
You got me. I can't figure it out unless. I mean, it's very weird that his opening salvo would be, I'm going to pick people that are so bad my own party won't support them, which is essentially what he's saying. He's going to have a minimum of 52 senators. Maybe he's going to pick such crazy people he thinks he can't get Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins and maybe one or two others. Maybe he wants to go so outside the norm that he doesn't think the Constitution should apply to him. But the Supreme Court has spoken on this. Recess appointments are stopgap for limited periods of time. If he has some idea, he can just blow up the Constitution over the role of confirmation and advice and consent. He is not talking to real lawyers, which, of course, he has a habit of doing.
Von Hilliard, what is your understanding of why Trump, with this commanding victory on Tuesday, there's no way to describe it as anything less than that, is using a tool, again, often turned to by presidents in weak political standing?
Let's be very clear structurally. There are still some senators that voted to convict him in the aftermath of the January 6th attack. People like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, Bill Cassidy, they're still in the U.S. Senate. And in the scenario that you add on another senator or two who are resistant to some of the picks who he believes are the best positioned to implement the policy that he wants to enact in these department and agencies, then it would be beneficial for him, in order to enact the policies he wants to enact, to bypass the confirmation process. And this, by guaranteeing that he has a Senate Majority Leader who, if he desires and wants to go that route, is willing to and ensures, while this is still an open process between the likes of a John Thune and a John Cornyn and a Rick Scott, well, it's going to be advantageous for him power-wise to make sure that he gets somebody in that Senate Majority Leader position who is not an inhibitor to his ability to go and use Washington in the 4 years that he has to his advantage. And that, I think, is why when you're hearing individuals like Kash Patel, who met resistance among some, let's be very clear, conservatives from Donald Trump's first administration, to, after 4 years, Donald Trump, as he has eyed how he would make a second administration look, if he wants to get people like Kash Patel in these positions here, it would be advantageous for him to find whatever path that it would take to be able to do that.
Charlie Sykes, Von's reporting is always 100% correct, but it requires us to pull another layer off the onion. I mean, Trump won the popular vote. Trump has a mandate to do whatever he wants. Trump just has to be 1 inch shy of his worst impulses, and he soars into Washington really with a mandate. I mean, I think it reveals a deeper phenomena, I think, that one, he still doesn't really understand power in Washington to turn to this weak leader tool. That's what the recess appointment is. It is, again, and I've worked for people who've had to use it, but only when their approval ratings were at the low point of Bush's presidency. It was after re-election. He was the lame duck, and he was struggling to get his appointees through. That's when he used it. Again, President Obama, at a point where he couldn't get people through any other way. I mean, it is not a tool used in a position of strength. What does it say to you that this is how he wants to bring his first batch of cabinet members into Washington?
Well, three things. First of all, I mean, this is his first shot across the bow of any idea of checks and balances. Number two, he is demanding absolute loyalty from the U.S. Senate, as opposed to thinking of Congress as a co-equal branch of government. You know, he is basically saying, look, here's my loyalty test. I want you to take a knee for me even before I take office. And of course, Rick Scott was the first guy to actually assume that position. And then number three, what you've been discussing is that, you know, despite his victory, he apparently would like to install people in the cabinet who are perhaps too extreme even for the Republican Party. I mean, I think the default position that we ought to have here, Nicolle, is that the Republican Party will always disappoint us and will always cave in. But having said that, he obviously has some concerns about what would happen if he appointed Rick Grinnell to a top position, or Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as, you know, to his cabinet as some sort of a health, you know, not a health czar, but, you know, HHS. So he obviously is thinking that there are some people who are too toxic even for a Republican majority. But I do think the most interesting thing here is how will the Senate Republicans react to this? Because the power of advice and consent is one of the Constitution's most important functions, to say that this is one of the key powers of the U.S. Senate. They are not just potted plants. They do not work for the president. For the Republican Senate to come in and preemptively surrender would be a stunning dereliction of duty, but also just an indication that they no longer take their co-equal branch of government position seriously. So I think that Donald Trump is basically saying, I want to have unitary control over all government. He's demanding absolute loyalty, and he's signaling that he is going to make appointments that will be too toxic to get through a 53 vote Republican majority Senate.
I'm never in disagreement with you, Charlie Sykes, but I mean, I think that's offensive to potted plants. This is a Senate Republican, and we should say their names. This is a group of men and women. Mitch McConnell didn't have the courage to vote for Trump's impeachment, but he referred him to Merrick Garland to deal with. I mean, there is nothing that they won't go along with. They just proved that to us.
That's right.
So what?
Well, that's what I said. Yeah.
So what opposition? I mean, and I think RFK Jr. and Rick Grinnell are out in the open. I don't think they'd have any problem being confirmed by a Republican Senate. Do you think there's something else? Is there a layer behind that?
Well, I think there's the layer behind it is that Donald Trump is coming in and he is saying that he wants absolute control over both the House and the Senate. And this is the loyalty test. And you're seeing it play out in MAGA world, that if you do not immediately bow, you know, take the knee for Donald Trump, you're going to have, you know, the various, you know, flying monkeys attack you. It is interesting, by the way, the role that Elon Musk is playing in all of this, kind of the shadow president, this billionaire bromance that's going on, I think is going to be one of the great stories of the next few months, if not the next few years. But this is kind of the litmus test. You're now seeing you know, can we break the Senate? I mean, I do think that we need to take a step back and understand that this is not just one among many constitutional norms. We've seen so many shattered. We've seen so many surrendered. But for the United States Senate to basically say, yeah, that whole advice and consent thing, we're willing to give that up for Donald Trump would be breathtaking, but it would be an indication of what's coming. And again, going back to what we have talked about for the last 8 years, I think that, if we keep asking the question, when will Republicans draw the line? When will Republicans stand up to Donald Trump? The answer, I think, you and I both know, Nicolle, is never. It's not going to happen. Do not expect them to stand, even when it comes to one of their core constitutional powers and functions. And by the way, the founding fathers never imagined that the Senate would do something like that.
I mean, Vaughn Hilliard, does the Trump side see any benefit to having the strength and the imprimatur of Senate confirmed nominees? I mean, do they, or are they all in on bypassing something that would give them appointees that could stay the whole time if Trump, I mean, what is their rationale?
I think that we saw multiple acting cabinet and administration officials serve in his first administration. So no, to answer your question, we saw a willingness to rely on individuals working in acting capacities back in 2019 and 2020, from Chad Wolf, who was the Homeland Secretary, to Chris Miller, who was working as the Pentagon Secretary in the aftermath of the 2020 election. Of course, Rick Grenell had been working as the acting Director of National Intelligence. And there is a lot of power in serving in either an acting capacity or serving as somebody who is a deputy, right, a deputy national security advisor, who, because there's no current national security advisor, is elevated to that sort of power. That the Trump administration, again, from the first time, legally, there is really no barriers at this point to the capacity and the power to which individuals in those roles, when they are in those roles, they're able to serve. Of course, that is where some of the conversation around the potential use of an acting attorney general has come up for the first several months of his administration. I had sources that I was talking to the last several months who suggested that the acting attorney general, for example, without Senate confirmation, could move forward with potential indictments and or impaneling of grand juries and then indictments in localities, so if they desired. And I think that that is where you see a Trump administration that wants to be unencumbered by what is, they say, an executive branch that has become full of roadblocks by career federal workers who stay in these roles from transition to transition. And that is where they have been eager to, and J.D. Vance has been the one openly talking about the need to, right, in his own words in 2021, fire 95% of the civil workforce to install Trump-loyal or MAGA-loyal individuals. And so I think that this is only an extension of it, that they are not eager to have a Senate majority, even a Republican Senate majority, that tries to hold them back from implementing what they want to get out of these departments and agencies, and what they say was a mandate that was handed down by the voters. They say it's not up to a couple senators elected a couple years ago to be the roadblocks to that change.
Claire, it's just amazing that they're the ones seeing ghosts and shadows, right? There are no roadblocks. I mean, he swept every battleground state. He increased his margins in New York and California. Trump is riding into Washington, whether anyone, I mean, just the political reality is that he is politically as dominant and strong as he's ever been. And that he's using these sort of tin can autocracy tools is, to me, still inexplicable.
Well, let me give you another perspective on this. He is playing some serious games behind the curtain around the Senate